2:45 Tuesday afternoon. Kate Jensen steps through the towering iron gates of the Song Estate in the Hollywood Hills, her cleaning supplies clutched against her chest, her heart pounding at the sight of Korean men in designer suits, with guns barely concealed beneath their tailored jackets. But it is not the armed guards that make her blood run cold. It is the sound that tears through the massive glass and steel mansion. The desperate, gut-wrenching cries of two babies that echo off every white marble wall and floor-to-ceiling window. At 29 years old, Kate has been working as a housekeeper here for 5 weeks, sent by an agency to replace the 8th maid who quit out of sheer terror. 5 weeks, and she still cannot get used to that sound. The twins have been crying for 6 hours straight today. Yesterday, it was 7 hours. The day before, 8. Dear God, those poor little angels, she whispers, pausing in the ultra-modern foyer to catch her breath, her fingers unconsciously tracing the raised scar along her collarbone. A permanent reminder of a husband who nearly killed her. Jin Jeon-song appears at the top of the floating staircase like a man who has lost everything. At 38 years old, the head of the most powerful Korean-American crime syndicate in Los Angeles looks like he has aged a lifetime in just 6 months. Dark circles carve deep hollows beneath his once sharp eyes. His perfectly groomed appearance has been replaced by disheveled hair and a wrinkled designer shirt he's been wearing for 3 days straight. He moves like a ghost haunting his own palace of glass and marble. They say he has ordered men's deaths with a single phone call without flinching. Yet here he stands, utterly broken by 2 tiny babies he cannot comfort. It has been over 6 months since anyone in this house has slept properly. 6 months of endless crying, 6 months of hell. Mrs. Kim, the 60-year-old Korean housekeeper who has served the Song family for 30 years, shakes her head with deep sorrow as she records notes in her worn notebook, documenting everything as she always does. Doryeonim, you need rest. You cannot continue like this. You will collapse. Sir, you need rest. Rest? Jin laughs bitterly in Korean, then switches to English, the sound hollow and empty. How can I rest when my children are screaming like they're being tortured? What kind of father am I? What kind of man lets his babies suffer like this? Kate freezes on the polished marble floor, the raw agony in his voice, in both languages, piercing straight through her chest. She knows that pain. She knows it intimately. 3 years ago, she was 7 months pregnant when her ex-husband Chandler beat her so badly that she went into premature labor and lost her baby girl, the daughter she was going to name Maya, the child she never got to hold. She understands what it means to watch a helpless creature suffer and be powerless to stop it. Jin grabs his phone with trembling hands, calling the doctor again, his voice cracking as he begs in rapid Korean and broken English for answers, for solutions, for anything. But the response from the other end only deepens his despair. They do not know what else to do. Pediatricians, neurologists, sleep specialists, infant therapists, even specialists flown in from Seoul. He has spent over $3 million. And nothing works. Nothing. He ends the call and slams his fist into the pristine white wall so hard a crack spiders across the surface. Mrs. Kim rushes toward him, urging him not to hurt himself. It's useless, Mrs. Kim. Jin growls through clenched teeth, switching back to Korean. Nanun sul moeop nun apaya. I am a useless father. I cannot even make my own children stop crying. I couldn't protect their mother, and now I cannot protect them. Kate watches everything with her heart shattering into pieces. She has never seen a man so completely destroyed, not even the monsters in her own past. His pain is real, raw, visceral, the kind that cuts down to the bone, and in that moment, something stirs inside her. Something she thought died the night she lost Maya. Something that recognizes the same grief in his dark, haunted eyes, across every barrier of race, language, and world. The cries of the twins grow louder from the nursery upstairs. Ji-hoon and Min-seo, 6 months old, half Korean and half Mexican, fighting against something no one can understand. Crying for a mother who will never come home. Crying for comfort that no amount of money can buy. Crying for something only a woman who understands loss could provide. Kate takes one step forward on the marble floor, then another, drawn toward that sound like a compass needle finding north. Mrs. Kim looks at her with ancient, knowing eyes. Jin turns, seeing her for perhaps the first time as more than just another expendable maid. And in the pristine, cold mansion where cultures clash and wealth cannot silence suffering, something is about to change, something that will save them all, or destroy everything they have left. If you want to know what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who loves a good drama, and stay tuned, because what Kate does next will change everything. That afternoon, Kate pushed her cleaning cart down the second-floor corridor of the Song Mansion, her sneakers silent against the heated marble floors. The ultramodern nursery waited at the end of the hallway, a room of pristine white walls, smart cribs that cost more than her entire year's rent, and designer mobiles imported from Seoul that played gentle melodies she couldn't understand. She had been instructed to clean while the babies were out for their afternoon doctor's appointment, another futile visit to another specialist who would have no answers. She entered the nursery and paused, taking in the contrast between the room's cold perfection and the chaos of suffering that lived here. Expensive toys sat untouched in their designer baskets. The cribs, equipped with every technological advancement money could buy, had failed to provide a single night of peace. Kate began dusting the changing table, then moved to the bookshelf lined with children's books in 3 languages: English, Korean, and Spanish, stories that had never been read, because the babies never stopped crying long enough to hear them. As she reached up to clean the top shelf, her elbow caught the edge of a celadon vase, traditional Korean pottery that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. It tilted, fell, and shattered across the wooden floor with a sound like breaking glass in a library. Kate's heart stopped. She dropped to her knees immediately, reaching for the pieces with trembling hands, already calculating how many months of wages it would take to replace, knowing she'd likely be fired before the sun set. "죄송합니다," she whispered frantically, one of the few Korean phrases she'd learned. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then she heard it. Hurried footsteps on the stairs, and that sound, that endless sound that haunted this house. The crying crashed through the open doorway like a wave. Jin burst into the room holding Ji-hoon, the baby's face purple with rage, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks, his little body rigid with whatever torment possessed him. Behind Jin, Min-jun, his right-hand man, the one with the scar across his jaw and eyes that had seen too much, carried Min-seo, who was crying just as desperately as her brother. Jin's eyes found the broken pottery on the floor, then moved to Kate kneeling there with blood on her hand from a shard she'd grabbed too quickly. But before he could speak, before he could fire her or demand payment, or do whatever powerful men did when their priceless things got broken by careless help, something happened that Kate couldn't explain. She looked at Ji-hoon, really looked at him, and saw past the screaming, past the wealth, past everything that separated their worlds. She saw a baby who was suffering, a child who needed comfort that money couldn't buy, and before her mind could stop her body, before fear could silence instinct, she stood and asked in broken, halting Korean, "Jega ana do doyo?" "May I hold him?" The words came out wrong, her accent terrible, but Jin understood. He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. No one asked to hold the babies anymore. The maids who lasted more than a week knew better than to volunteer for that particular torture. But something in Kate's face, some desperate recognition, some mirror of his own pain, made him step forward and place Ji-hoon into her arms. The moment Kate's hands touched the baby, everything changed. Ji-hoon stopped crying. Not gradually, not winding down like a toy losing battery, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch inside his tiny body. His mouth closed mid-scream. His rigid limbs relaxed. His red, swollen eyes opened and looked up at Kate's face with an expression that seemed almost like wonder. The silence was so sudden, so complete, that it felt violent in its own way. Minjun froze mid-step, his mouth falling open. Jin's face went white, then red, then white again, as if his body couldn't decide how to process what it was seeing. And Minseo, still crying in Minjun's arms, turned her head toward her brother and the strange woman holding him. Her cries began to quiet, hiccuping into silence. Kate didn't think. She just moved on instinct, doing what her body remembered even though her baby girl had never lived long enough to be held like this. She began to hum, low and soft, an old gospel hymn her grandmother used to sing in the Baptist church in South Central. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. The melody drifted through the sterile, perfect nursery, bringing something warm and human into the cold space. Ji-hoon's eyes began to close. His tiny fist wrapped around Kate's finger, brown skin against brown skin, and refused to let go. Minseo made a small sound, reaching toward her brother, toward Kate, toward something she recognized even if no one else could understand it. "Eoteoke?" Jin whispered, the Korean word escaping his lips before he could catch it. How? He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his expensive clothes creasing, his carefully maintained control crumbling. "Eoteoke ge ireonilai?" How is this possible? Mrs. Kim appeared in the doorway, drawn by the impossible silence. She saw Kate holding Ji-hoon, saw Minseo quiet and reaching, saw her master sitting on the floor with tears streaming down his face. She pulled out her worn notebook with shaking hands and wrote in Korean, "First miracle witnessed in 30 years serving this family." The black woman with sad eyes brought silence where millions of dollars brought nothing. Kate swayed gently, still humming, and Minjun slowly approached, holding Minseo out like an offering. Kate adjusted Ji-hoon against her shoulder with one arm and took Minseo with the other, her body remembering how to hold two at once, even though she'd never had the chance to practice. Minseo nestled against her, her crying reduced to soft whimpers, then to nothing. Both babies, 6 months of endless screaming, fell asleep in Kate's arms. No one moved. No one spoke. They all just stared at the impossible scene. This black woman in a cheap maid's uniform, holding 2 half-Korean babies in an ultra-modern mansion, humming a song about sparrows while the most powerful crime boss in Los Angeles sat on the floor and wept. But in the doorway, hidden in the shadows where no one was looking, Dr. Paula Clayton watched with her hands clenched into fists. She had stopped by for her routine check on the babies, had been about to announce herself when she heard the silence. Now she saw Jin looking at this woman, this maid, this black woman, with an expression she had never seen on his face in all the years she'd loved him. Something between wonder and worship, something that should have been reserved for her. Paula's mind raced, calculating, planning. She stepped back silently, her medical bag clutched against her chest, her face carefully composed. When Mrs. Kim noticed her a moment later and called out a greeting, Paula smiled her professional smile and said she'd come back another time, that she didn't want to disturb the babies now that they were finally resting. But as she walked back down the corridor, her heels clicking against the marble with sharp, angry precision, she pulled out her phone and typed a message. "Jin, this is Dr. Clayton. I'm concerned. Do you know anything about this new woman? About her background? Where she's from? I just want to make sure the children are safe. You can never be too careful with strangers." She paused at the top of the stairs, looking back at the nursery where that woman still held those babies like she had any right to them. Paula's jaw tightened. She had worked too hard, waited too long, done things that would haunt her forever to secure her place in Jin's life. She wouldn't let some ghetto maid who happened to be good with babies take what was rightfully hers. Kate had no idea she'd just made the most dangerous enemy of her life. 3 days passed in a blur that felt like waking from a nightmare into something Kate didn't dare call hope. She slept in the small staff quarters on the third floor, close enough to hear when the babies stirred, and each time they cried, she went to them. Each time, the miracle repeated itself. Her touch, her voice, her presence, something about her made them stop. The household began to breathe again. Mrs. Kim started cooking full meals instead of sad cups of instant noodles. The guards at the gate relaxed their shoulders. And Jin Gyeon's song began to look human again. On the fourth morning, Mrs. Kim found Kate folding laundry in the utility room and told her, in careful English mixed with Korean, that the master wanted to see her in his office. Now. Kate's hands went cold. The office was forbidden territory. She'd been told that the first day. No cleaning staff entered unless Jin was traveling. It was his sanctuary, his war room. The place where he ran an empire she tried very hard not to think about. As she walked down the floating staircase to the first floor, her heart hammered against her ribs. Maybe he'd realized he didn't need a maid anymore. Maybe the miracle had worn off. Maybe this whole fragile dream was about to shatter like that vase she'd broken. The office door was glass and steel, like everything else in this house. Through it, she could see him, sitting behind a massive desk of dark wood, the only traditional piece of furniture in the entire mansion. Behind him, Korean art covered the walls, bold calligraphy, landscape paintings of mountains she'd never see, a photograph of an older couple she assumed were his parents. He looked up when she knocked and gestured for her to enter. "Sit down, Kate." He spoke in English, his accent barely noticeable, the product of an American education she knew nothing about. She sat in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The silence stretched. Jin studied her face like he was trying to read something written in a language he didn't quite understand. "I'm going to offer you something," he said finally, "and I need you to listen to everything before you answer." Kate nodded, not trusting her voice. "I want you to become my children's private nanny. You'll live here full-time. Your salary will be 15 times what the cleaning agency pays you. You'll have your own room, your own space. All you have to do is take care of Ji-hoon and Min-seo." The number hit her like a physical blow. 15 times. That would be enough to... She couldn't even calculate it. More money than she'd ever imagined earning. Enough to finally be free. "Mr. Song, she started. But he held up his hand. "I know who you are, Kate. I know about Chandler Williams. I know about the abuse, the hospital visits you lied about, the baby you lost at 7 months. I know about the $75,000 debt he left you with to the Westside Kings. I know everything." Kate's world tilted. Her mouth went dry. She started to stand, to run, to sit down. Jin's voice carried the weight of command, the tone of a man used to being obeyed. She sat. "I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you a way out. Take care of my children, and I'll erase that debt. Chandler Williams will never touch you again. You'll be under my protection, which means more than you understand right now." "Why?" Kate whispered. "I'm just a maid." "Why would you?" "Because my children need you. And I don't know why, but I don't care. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do, I will not lose them." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Their mother died bringing them into this world. I couldn't protect her. But I can protect them. And apparently, you can too." Kate's mind spun. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was a deal with a man whose reputation included words like ruthless and deadly and untouchable. But it was also a way out. A way to stop running. A way to never again wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if Chandler had found her new address. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Jin's eyebrows rose slightly. No one gave him conditions, but he nodded. "Tell me." "I won't do anything illegal. I won't carry messages. I won't hold packages. I won't be part of whatever business you're in. And you'll treat me with dignity. I'm not property. I'm not..." Her voice caught. "I'm not something you own just because you're paying me." For the first time since she'd entered the room, Jin smiled. It was small, sad, but genuine. Agreed. You're the children's caregiver. Nothing more, nothing less. You have my word. Kate studied his face, looking for lies, for traps, for the violence she knew lived somewhere in this beautiful, broken man. But all she saw was exhaustion and desperate hope. Then yes, she said quietly. I'll do it. Jin nodded once, then pulled out his phone and made a call in rapid Korean. Kate caught maybe one word in 10. Her name, a number, the word for immediately. He hung up and told her the paperwork would be ready by evening, that Mrs. Kim would help her move her few belongings to a larger room on the second floor, near the nursery. That night, after Kate had settled Ji-hoon and Min-seo into their cribs, after she'd hummed them into peaceful sleep for what felt like the 100th miracle, Min-jun knocked on her door. The scarred man who rarely spoke looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight like he was about to deliver news he wished he didn't have. "Boss wants to see you again." Now. Fear spiked through her. Had Jin changed his mind? Found something worse in her background? But Min-jun's face wasn't hostile. It was troubled. She followed him back down to the office where Jin stood at the window, looking out at the lights of Los Angeles spread below like fallen stars. "Chandler Williams," Jin said without turning around. "Worked for the Yoon organization 3 years ago, their rival group. He was involved in an operation that targeted my wife." He turned to face Kate and his eyes were dark with something that made her take an involuntary step back. "Did you know?" "No." The word came out strangled. "I didn't know? Jin, I swear to God, I didn't know anything about his work. He never told me anything. I thought he was just..." She couldn't finish. Just what? Just an abusive bastard who beat pregnant women? As if that wasn't enough? Jin stared at her for a long moment, then spoke rapidly in Korean to Min-jun. Min-jun responded, gesturing at Kate, his tone almost offensive. Jin's shoulders relaxed incrementally. He switched back to English. "I believe you. Min-jun says you're telling the truth. He's a good judge of people. Better than I am sometimes." Jin crossed the room and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "But you need to understand what this means. Chandler Williams is a dead man walking. When I find him, and I will find him, he'll answer for what he did to you and what he tried to do to my family. Are you going to have a problem with that?" Kate's throat closed. She should say yes. Should refuse to be part of whatever dark justice Jin was planning. Should hold on to some shred of the person she'd been before Chandler destroyed her. But that person was gone, and standing in front of this man who'd offered her protection, freedom, and a purpose when she'd had none, Kate found she didn't have a problem with it at all. "No," she whispered. "I won't have a problem." Jin's phone rang, shattering the tension. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. "Iyama," he muttered, then answered in Korean. Kate didn't understand most of it, but she heard the tone, Jin's voice getting sharper, more defensive. She caught her own name, and then a phrase Min-jun had taught her, Hugin Yoja, black woman. Jin's mother was calling from Seoul, and she'd already heard about the new nanny. The conversation grew heated. Jin paced the room like a caged tiger, switching between Korean and English, his frustration mounting. Finally, he said in English, probably for Kate's benefit, "Iyama, the babies need her. That's all that matters. I don't care what your friends say. I don't care what's traditional. My children are sleeping for the first time in 6 months. End of discussion." He ended the call and stood there, breathing hard, his knuckles white around the phone. When he looked at Kate, she saw the war in his eyes, cultural obligation fighting against desperate necessity. "My mother," he said quietly, "doesn't understand. She thinks I'm making a mistake, that I should hire someone more appropriate." He said the last word like it tasted bitter. "But she's in Seoul, and I'm here, and my children need you." Kate nodded slowly, understanding more than he'd said. She was the wrong color, wrong background, wrong everything for the traditional Korean mother of a powerful family's heir. She'd known this would be complicated. She just hadn't realized how quickly the complications would start. "From now on," Jin said, his voice taking on that command tone again, "you're under my protection. Chandler will never hurt you again. My mother will adjust. And anyone who has a problem with you will answer to me. Understand?" "Yes," Kate said. "I understand." But as she left the office and climbed the stairs to her new room, larger than any apartment she'd ever rented, with a view of the gardens and the city beyond, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into a war she didn't understand. And somewhere out there, Chandler was still alive, still hunting her, still believing she belonged to him. She went to check on the babies one more time before bed. They slept peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Ji-hoon's fist was curled against his cheek. Min-seo's mouth was slightly open, her dark eyelashes casting shadows on her round cheeks. Kate stood there in the doorway, watching them, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. These babies needed her. And for the first time in 3 years, since the night she'd lost Maya, Kate Jensen needed something too. She needed to be needed. She needed to matter to someone. She needed to prove that she was more than the broken thing Chandler had made her. Whatever happened next, whoever disapproved, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows of this beautiful glass mansion, Kate had made her choice. She was staying. Real talk. If you're still listening right now, you're already in it. Don't be the kind of person who lets a story move them and then disappears without supporting the place it came from. Subscribe and tell me in the comments. Are you already scared for those babies? Or for Kate? 3 weeks passed like a slow sunrise after a long, dark night, and the Song Mansion began to remember what peace felt like. Ji-hoon and Min-seo transformed from tiny creatures trapped in endless anguish to actual babies, smiling, cooing, reaching for the world with curious hands. Kate watched it happen with wonder that never quite faded, even as caring for them became her new rhythm, her new purpose, her new life. Ji-hoon's first real giggle came on a Tuesday morning while Kate was changing his diaper. She'd been making silly faces, exhausted and running on 4 hours of sleep, when he suddenly burst into laughter, a sound so pure and unexpected that Kate started crying right there, tears falling onto his little belly while he laughed at her crying, which made her laugh too. Mrs. Kim heard it from the hallway and came running, then stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, her own eyes wet. Min-seo's first real smile came 3 days later when Kate sang her favorite gospel hymn, the one about the sparrow. The baby's face lit up like someone had turned on a light inside her, and she reached both hands toward Kate's face, patting her cheeks with gentle, clumsy affection. Kate lifted her up and spun her around the nursery, both of them laughing, and didn't notice Jin standing in the doorway watching them with an expression Mrs. Kim would later describe in her notebook as the first time he looked alive since Ji-yeon died. Jin started eating again. Real meals at the massive dining table instead of coffee and protein bars consumed while staring at his laptop. Kate would bring the twins down for breakfast, and Jin would hold them while she prepared their bottles, the 3 of them sitting together in the morning sunlight that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He began to look human again, the haunted hollows under his eyes fading, his shoulders losing their permanent tension, his clothes returning to their usual immaculate state. The late-night feedings became something neither of them had expected, a space for truth. Kate would be in the nursery at 2 a.m., rocking Min-seo back to sleep, and Jin would appear in the doorway, unable to sleep himself. Old nightmares keeping him awake. He'd sit in the other rocking chair with Ji-hoon, and they'd talk in whispers while the babies dozed. He taught her Korean lullabies, repeating the phrases slowly until she could approximate the sounds. Ja-jang uri agi, she'd sing, stumbling over the words, and he'd smile, actually smile, and correct her pronunciation. She taught him the gospel songs her grandmother sang, the spirituals that had survived slavery and Jim Crow and everything after, and he'd listen with his eyes closed, letting the melody wash over him. Jiyeon loved to sing, he told her one night, his voice soft in the darkness. She had a terrible voice, but she didn't care. She'd sing K-pop songs to the babies while she was pregnant, completely off-key, and I'd pretend to complain, but I loved it. I loved her so much. Kate didn't know what to say to that, so she just hummed and rocked Min Seo, giving him space for his grief. She was supposed to live, Jin continued. The delivery was supposed to be routine, but something went wrong. The doctor said it was complications, but his voice broke. I couldn't protect her. And then I couldn't even comfort the babies she died giving me. What kind of man am I? You're a father who loves his children, Kate said quietly. That's what kind of man you are. Everything else is just noise. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Kate felt something shift between them. Something dangerous and inevitable, like an avalanche starting on a distant mountain. During the days, Kate cooked soul food in the industrial kitchen, teaching Mrs. Y. Kim how to make her grandmother's collard greens and cornbread, while Mrs. Kim introduced her to Korean dishes, bibimbap, kimchi jjigae, tteokbokki that made Kate's eyes water from the spice. They'd feed the babies together, mashing up soft rice and vegetables, laughing when Ji-hoon spit out something he didn't like, and Min Seo shoved her entire fist in her mouth trying to get more. Jin took Kate to a Korean grocery store in Koreatown, both of them wearing baseball caps and sunglasses like celebrities hiding from paparazzi. He showed her how to pick the best gochugaru, explained the difference between different types of doenjang, bought her a beginner's Korean language learning book that she studied late at night when the babies slept. She was terrible at it. The sounds felt impossible. The grammar completely backward. But she kept trying because she wanted to understand the lullabies she sang, wanted to know what Jin said when he whispered to his children in his mother tongue. The twins began to light up whenever Kate entered a room, their whole faces transforming with recognition and joy. Ji-hoon would kick his legs excitedly, making a sound that Mrs. Kim swore was the beginning of Kate, but was probably just baby babbling. Min Seo would reach out with both arms, making little urgent sounds until Kate picked her up. And Kate's heart, which she thought had shattered beyond repair the night she lost Maya, began to piece itself back together in a way she'd never imagined possible. She was becoming their mother. Not by blood, not by any claim she had a right to make, but by every definition that mattered. And terrifyingly, wonderfully, she was starting to love them like they were her own. Jin watched her from distances he thought she didn't notice, from the doorway while she played with the twins on their floor mat, from the hallway while she sang them to sleep, from the kitchen entrance while she made bottles and danced to the radio. Mrs. Kim noticed, documenting it in her notebook. Master watches the young woman the way a man dying of thirst watches water, but he doesn't drink. He just watches and wants. Master finally smiling again after years of darkness, Mrs. Kim told Min Jun one morning while they had coffee in the kitchen. The black woman brought light back to this house, brought him back to life. But not everyone saw it as a blessing. Dr. Paula Clayton came by twice a week for her routine wellness checks on the twins, a schedule she'd maintained since their birth. She'd arrive in her white Tesla, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her medical bag expensive leather, everything about her screaming competence and belonging. And every visit, she'd watch Kate with eyes that grew colder and sharper. She'd examine the babies and find them thriving. She'd note their weight gain, their developmental milestones, their obvious attachment to their caregiver. And each healthy report felt like a knife in her chest because it meant Kate was succeeding where Paula had secretly hoped she'd fail. How dare he look at her like that? Paula thought during her third visit, watching Jin's face soften as Kate brought the twins in for their checkup. She's just a maid. And Paula's mind supplied words she'd never say aloud, but felt poisonously in her heart. Not even the right kind of person for a family like this. For a man like him. Paula had loved Jin for 6 years, since before he married Ji-yeon. She'd stood by and watched him marry the wrong woman, had delivered his babies, had held his hand when Ji-yeon died. She'd positioned herself perfectly, waiting for the right moment when grief made him vulnerable, when he'd finally see that Paula was exactly what he needed. Someone appropriate, someone who understood his world, someone who looked right standing next to him. And then this woman, this black maid from God knows where, had walked in and stolen everything Paula had been working toward. In 3 weeks, Kate had accomplished what Paula couldn't do in years. She'd made Jin smile, made him laugh, made him look alive again. At night, alone in her pristine apartment, Paula pulled up Kate's background check on her laptop, the one she'd paid a private investigator to compile. Domestic abuse survivor, child lost to violence, massive debt, ex-husband with gang connections. Paula studied the information like a general studying enemy terrain, looking for weaknesses, for pressure points, for ways to make this woman disappear. Meanwhile, Jin's Korean associates were having their own conversations. They met in his office while Kate was upstairs with the babies. These men in expensive suits who'd built an empire alongside Jin's father and now served his son. And they didn't bother to lower their voices because they assumed Kate wouldn't understand Korean. "Boss, are you sure about this black woman?" one asked. "사람들이 얘기하고 있습니다." People are talking. "She's good with the children, yes," another said carefully. "But you must consider appearances. What message does this send? First a Mexican wife, now a black nanny. You clearly favor the traditional families?" "Are not raising my children." Jin cut them off, his voice cold. "I don't care what people say. I don't care about appearances. My children are sleeping. They're eating. They're laughing for the first time in their lives. That's the only message that matters. But boss? Haseo. Stop. Let them talk. My children are alive again. End of discussion." But it wasn't the end, and everyone knew it. The whispers continued, growing louder with each passing week. The traditional Korean community in Los Angeles noticed. Jin's mother called from Seoul daily. Her disapproval transmitted across the ocean in long, tense conversations. And Paula listened to it all, cataloging every objection, every piece of gossip, every crack in the foundation. One afternoon, Paula arrived for her checkup and found Jin in the nursery, teaching Kate how to make Korean hand shadows on the wall for the babies. They were laughing together, their heads close, his hand guiding hers to make a bird shape while Ji-hoon and Min-seo watched with fascinated eyes. The scene was so domestic, so intimate, so completely wrong in Paula's mind that she felt something crack inside her chest. Jin looked up and saw her, stepping back quickly, but not quickly enough. Paula had seen everything in that moment, the way he looked at Kate, the softness in his usually hard face, the happiness that should have been Paula's. "Dr. Clayton," he said formally, "I didn't hear you come up." "Clearly," Paula said with her professional smile locked in place. "I came to check on the twins. They look well. Kate must be doing an excellent job." Kate smiled at her, warm and genuine, completely unaware that she was standing in a viper's nest. "The babies are wonderful, growing so fast." "Indeed," Paula said, pulling on latex gloves with sharp snapping sounds. "Jin, might I speak with you privately after the exam about the children's vaccination schedule?" After she'd examined Ji-hoon and Min-seo, both perfectly healthy, another knife to her heart, Paula asked Jin to walk her to her car. Once outside, away from Kate's hearing, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Jin, I'm worried about you, about the children." She kept her voice soft, concerned, professional. "I know you care about Kate. She's clearly good with the babies. But do you really know her? Have you thoroughly vetted her background? Her connections?" "She's been investigated," Jin said stiffly. "I know everything about her." "But do you know about her ex-husband's gang affiliations? About the people he worked with? Some of them are connected to families that would love to hurt you." Paula paused, letting that sink in. "I just want to make sure you're safe, that your children are safe." You can never be too careful, especially with someone so different from your usual circle. She said the last part carefully, leaving the implications unspoken but clear. Jin's face hardened. Kate is not a threat to my family. Of course not, Paula said quickly. I'm sure you're right. I'm just being cautious because I care about you. You know I've always cared about you. She let that hang in the air. The years of devotion, of availability, of being exactly what his traditional world would expect him to want. Then she got in her Tesla and drove away, leaving poison in the air like perfume. But Kate, upstairs in the nursery, knew none of this. She was too busy being happy, falling in love with two babies who needed her, and slowly, terrifyingly, beginning to imagine that maybe she could belong here. That maybe this beautiful glass mansion full of danger and Korean traditions could somehow become home. She had no idea that every smile she earned from Jin, every milestone the babies reached in her care, every moment of peace she created, was building her enemy's rage into something deadly. Paula Clayton was done watching, done waiting, done being the patient professional who played by rules. It was time to make Kate Jensen disappear. The abandoned warehouse in South Central Los Angeles smelled like rust and forgotten dreams, its broken windows letting in streams of late afternoon light that cut through the darkness like accusatory fingers. Paula Clayton stood in the center of the concrete floor, her white Mercedes parked outside looking obscenely out of place in this neighborhood of chain-link fences and boarded-up buildings. She checked her watch for the third time, her jaw tight with impatience, when she finally heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Chandler Williams emerged from the shadows like something that had crawled out of hell specifically for this meeting. At 32, he still carried the build of his college football days, 6.3 of muscle gone slightly soft around the edges, with hands that looked like they could break bones without effort. His eyes found Paula and narrowed with suspicion mixed with interest. A white woman doctor calling him out of nowhere, offering money to meet in his old territory. This was either opportunity or a trap. You, Paula? His voice was rough, carrying the weight of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. Mr. Williams, thank you for coming. Paula kept her voice steady, professional, even though her heart was racing. She'd never done anything like this before, never stepped so far outside the lines of who she pretended to be, but desperate times, and all that. I have a proposition that will benefit us both. Chandler laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Lady, you got 5 minutes before I decide you're wasting my time. What you want? I want to help you get revenge on Kate Jensen, and I want you to help me remove her from a situation she has no business being in. Paula pulled out her phone and showed him a photo she'd taken through the mansion windows, Kate holding the twins, Jin watching her with that expression that made Paula's stomach burn. She's living in the Hollywood Hills now, working as a nanny for a very wealthy, very powerful Korean man, living the life she ran away from you to find. She watched Chandler's face darken, his hands curling into fists. Perfect. The rage was still there, still fresh, still exploitable. That bitch, Chandler breathed, staring at the photo. She's been hiding there this whole time, living in some mansion with some rich Asian dude while I'm out here with her debt hanging over my head. I can tell you exactly where she is. I can tell you her schedule, when she's vulnerable. Everything you need. Paula paused, letting that sink in. And I'll pay you $150,000, plus erase any debt she left you with. All you have to do is help me make her disappear from that house. Permanently. Chandler's eyes snapped to her face. You want me to kill her? No, Paula said quickly, though the thought had crossed her mind more than once in her darker moments. I want you to wait. I'm going to handle removing her from the situation. But when she's out, when she has nowhere to go and no one to protect her, I need you to make sure she understands she can never come back. That she doesn't belong in that world, with those children, with him. The racist venom in Paula's voice leaked through despite her careful control. She couldn't help it. Every time she saw Kate's brown skin against the pristine white of that mansion, every time she saw Jin look at Kate like she was something precious, it made Paula want to scream. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. Kate was a maid, a survivor of abuse, a woman from the ghetto who should have stayed in her place, not living in a glass palace, not raising Korean babies, and definitely not catching the eye of the man Paula had sacrificed everything to position herself near. Chandler studied her with calculating eyes. You're doing this because you want him, the Korean guy. You're jealous. I'm doing this because she doesn't belong there, Paula snapped. And yes, because Jin Song is supposed to be with someone appropriate, someone from his world, someone who looks right next to him. She didn't say the rest. Someone white, someone educated, someone who wasn't Kate. But Chandler heard it anyway. He smiled, ugly and knowing. You're as twisted as I am. I like that. He crossed his arms over his broad chest. All right, I'm listening. What's your plan? Paula pulled out a small vial from her medical bag. Infant sedative, the same kind used in hospitals for procedures, strong enough to render a baby unconscious but not lethal if dosed carefully. I'm going to frame her. I'll poison one of the children myself, just enough to make them sick. Then plant the evidence in her room. Jin will throw her out. And when he does, you'll be waiting. You're gonna hurt a baby? Even Chandler looked disturbed by that. I'm going to give a baby a temporary sedative that will make them sleep deeply for a few hours. I'm a doctor. I know exactly what I'm doing. The child will be fine. Paula's voice was ice cold now, all pretense of warmth gone. But Jin will never forgive her, never trust her again, and that ghetto girl will learn her place once and for all. Chandler was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he thought it through. Paula could see the war in his face, some vestigial piece of conscience fighting against rage and greed and wounded pride. But she knew which side would win. Men like Chandler always chose their worst impulses. She thought she was too good for me, Chandler finally said, his voice low and poisonous. Thought she could just leave, just run away and start over. Living with some rich Asian dude in the hills while I'm dealing with her debt to the kings. You know what? Yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. Paula felt a rush of triumph so intense it was almost sexual. Finally she could fix this mistake, this wrong turn her carefully planned future had taken. Perfect. There's just one more thing. Jin is flying to Seoul in 3 days for emergency family business. He'll be gone for 4 days. That's when I'll make my move. And I wait for you to contact me when she's out? Exactly. When she's thrown out with nowhere to go, when she's broken and alone, I'll send you her location. Then you make sure she never comes back. Paula extended her hand. Do we have a deal? Chandler looked at her hand. Soft, white, manicured. The hand of someone who'd never had to fight for anything, and took it with his scarred, calloused one. 2 broken, twisted souls shaking hands in an abandoned warehouse, united by jealousy and rage and hatred that had nothing to do with the woman they were plotting against, and everything to do with their own poisoned hearts. We got a deal, Chandler said. That bitch is gonna regret the day she ever thought she was better than me. Paula drove back to her pristine apartment in Santa Monica as the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of blood. She felt almost giddy with anticipation. Soon everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. Jin would see that Kate was just another ghetto girl who couldn't be trusted, another mistaken judgment. He'd turn back to Paula, the one who'd been there all along, the one who actually deserved him. And Kate Jensen would learn what happened to people who reached above their station, who dared to dream they could belong in a world that was never meant for them. 3 days later, Jin stood in the mansion's foyer with his overnight bag, his face tight with stress. His mother had called about his father's health, about family business that couldn't wait, about responsibilities that being an ocean away didn't erase. Kate came down the stairs with the twins, both babies fresh from their bath and smelling like lavender and innocence. Keep my babies safe, Jin said, looking at Kate with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I trust you with their lives." Kate held Ji-hoon and Min-seo closer, feeling the weight of that trust like a physical thing. "I promise, Mr. Song. With everything I have." She had no idea she'd just made a promise she couldn't keep. Had no idea that her enemy was already moving, already planning, already counting down the hours until Kate's world would shatter into pieces too small to ever put back together. The conspiracy was in motion, and Kate, beautiful, broken, trusting Kate, didn't see it coming. Friday morning arrived with deceptive brightness, sunshine pouring through the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows like a promise that the universe had no intention of keeping. Kate woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of Ji-hoon babbling in his crib, his little voice forming sounds that were almost words, and her heart swelled with the now familiar joy of being needed. She changed both twins, dressed them in matching outfits that Mrs. Kim had laid out, and brought them downstairs for breakfast. Everything perfectly normal, everything perfectly fine. Until Dr. Paula Clayton's white Tesla pulled through the gates at 9:30 a.m. Kate saw her through the window and felt a small flutter of unease she couldn't quite name. Paula had been colder lately, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes, but Kate had attributed it to stress or perhaps disapproval of Jin's unconventional childcare choice. She'd been determinedly kind anyway, offering coffee, chatting about the twins' milestones, trying to build a bridge Paula seemed uninterested in crossing. "Good morning, Dr. Clayton," Kate said, opening the door with Min-seo on her hip. "We weren't expecting you today." "Routine wellness check," Paula said smoothly, her medical bag in hand, everything about her radiating competence and authority. "I like to make sure the twins are thriving, especially with Jin out of the country. You know how he worries." Something in Kate's stomach tightened, but she pushed it aside. She was being paranoid. Paula was a doctor doing her job. "Of course, come in. Ji-hoon's in the playroom." "Should I bring him up to the nursery?" "Actually, why don't you take him to the playroom and let him have some floor time? I'll examine Min-seo first. Sometimes it's easier to check them individually, less crying when they see their sibling getting poked." Paula's smile was practiced, perfect, and completely empty. Kate hesitated. She never left the twins alone with anyone except Mrs. Kim and Jin. But this was their doctor, the woman who'd been caring for them since birth, and Kate's insistence on staying might seem paranoid or possessive. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll be just down the hall if you need me." "Take your time," Paula said. "This won't take long." Kate carried Ji-hoon to the playroom, setting him up with his favorite toys on the soft mat, her instinct screaming that something was wrong even though she couldn't articulate what. She stood in the doorway, watching him play, fighting the urge to run back to the nursery. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself. "Paula is a doctor, a professional. She's not going to—" She didn't even know what she was afraid of. In the nursery, Paula closed the door with a soft click and turned to Min-seo, who was lying in her crib cooing at the mobile above her head, completely trusting, completely vulnerable. Paula looked at the baby for a long moment, and something that might have been conscience flickered across her face before being drowned by the tide of jealousy and rage that had been building for weeks. "I'm sorry," Paula whispered, and meant it in some distant, disconnected way. "But you're not supposed to be here. Your mother wasn't supposed to die. And that woman out there definitely isn't supposed to be in your life. This is the only way to fix it." She pulled out the vial of infant sedative and a small syringe, her hands perfectly steady. Years of medical training overriding the human horror of what she was about to do. She calculated the dose with cold precision, enough to make Min-seo dangerously unresponsive, enough to terrify everyone, but not enough to actually kill her. Paula wasn't a murderer. She was just correcting a mistake. Min-seo smiled up at her, reaching tiny hands toward Paula's face, and Paula felt nothing. She picked up the baby, held her close, and administered the injection so quickly and expertly that Min-seo barely had time to whimper. Then Paula set her back in the crib, pocketed the syringe, and pulled out a second vial, identical to the first, and slipped it into her pocket. She waited 3 minutes, watching as Minseo's eyes grew heavy, as her active little body went limp, as the sedative pulled her down into unconsciousness that looked too much like death. Paula checked her vitals with clinical detachment, breathing shallow but steady, heart rate slow but acceptable, pupils responsive. Good. Perfect. Exactly as planned. Then Paula walked calmly out of the nursery, past Kate in the playroom, and made an excuse about needing something from her car. Instead, she went upstairs to the staff quarters, to Kate's private bathroom. So easy to find, so easy to access, and placed the vial on the shelf behind Kate's toiletries, where it would be discovered but not immediately obvious. Evidence planted. Trap set. The conspiracy's final pieces sliding into place. Paula returned downstairs, called out a goodbye that Kate barely heard, and drove away. She didn't go far, just to a coffee shop 3 blocks away where she sat with her laptop and waited for the phone call she knew was coming. She felt almost calm, almost righteous, like God's instrument, correcting the universe's mistake. 3 hours later, Kate walked into the nursery to check on Minseo and found her nightmare waiting. The baby wasn't moving. Her skin was cold, too cold, and her tiny chest barely rose and fell. Kate snatched her up, Minseo's little body limp as a rag doll, and started screaming. "Mrs. Kim! Mrs. Kim! Something's wrong with Minseo! Call 911! Call Jin! Something's wrong!" Kate's hands shook as she tried to wake the baby, patting her cheeks, rubbing her chest, begging her to open her eyes. Minseo didn't respond. Kate grabbed her phone with fumbling fingers and video called Jin in Seoul, her voice breaking. "Jin! Jin! It's Minseo! She won't wake up! She's so cold! I don't know what happened!" Jin's face appeared on the screen, and Kate watched him die inside in real time. His skin went gray. His eyes went wide with pure terror. "Get her to the hospital now! I'm getting on a plane! Now, Kate!" The ambulance came screaming up the hill, paramedics taking Minseo from Kate's arms while she sobbed and tried to explain that the baby had been fine, had been perfect, just hours ago. They rushed Minseo to Children's Hospital Los Angeles, Kate riding in the ambulance with Min Jun following in the SUV. Both of them praying in different languages to different gods for the same miracle. In the emergency room, the doctors worked with terrifying efficiency while Kate paced the hallway, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. Ji-hoon was with Mrs. Kim back at the mansion, probably screaming for his sister, for Kate, for everything to go back to normal. An hour later, the ER doctor emerged with a clipboard and a confused expression. "We found infant sedative in her bloodstream. A significant amount, like someone deliberately administered it. We need to contact the police. This could be attempted murder." Kate's world tilted. "What? No. No. I would never. I didn't." Her phone rang. Paula's name on the screen. Kate answered with shaking hands. "Dr. Clayton, Minseo is in the hospital. They found—" "I know." Paula's voice was carefully concerned, professionally worried. "Jin just called me. Listen, Kate, I hate to say this, but when I was there this morning, I saw you acting strange. You seemed distracted, almost dissociated, and I'm worried you might not have been in your right mind. You should know. Jin asked me to tell the doctors to search your room. I'm sure it's nothing, but with your history of trauma, sometimes people do things they don't remember when they're triggered." Kate felt ice flood her veins. "Paula, I didn't do anything. I would never hurt Minseo, you know that." "Of course," Paula said soothingly, "but maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist. Just to be safe." Paula hung up, and Kate stood there in the hospital hallway, her phone clutched in her trembling hand, understanding with horrible clarity that she'd just been framed, that someone had set her up. But before she could process that thought, before she could even begin to figure out what to do, Min Jun came running toward her, his face grim. "Boss is on his way back from Seoul. He told me to search your room." Min Jun's voice was apologetic but firm. "Kate, they found a bottle of sedative in your bathroom, the same sedative in Minseo's blood." Kate's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold hospital floor, her vision swimming. I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. Someone put it there. Someone is... But she saw it in Minjun's eyes, the doubt, the terrible, creeping doubt. And if Minjun, who'd been kind to her, who defended her, was doubting, then Jin would destroy her. Jin arrived 8 hours later, having chartered a private jet the moment Minseo was admitted. He came through the hospital doors like a hurricane, still wearing the clothes he'd traveled in, his eyes wild with fear and fury and something darker. Kate stood when she saw him, tried to move toward him, tried to explain. Jin, please, I didn't do this. I would never... I trusted you. His voice was so cold it burned. I brought you into my home. I protected you. I gave you everything. And you... His face contorted with rage and grief, and the words that came out of his mouth were slurs Kate had heard before, but never from him, never directed at her with such venom. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing but a ghetto bitch who... Jin! Minjun tried to intervene, but Jin was beyond reason. Don't call me that, Jin snarled at Kate. You don't get to use my name. You don't get to be in my sight. You poisoned my daughter, my child. After everything. After I... He couldn't even finish, his voice breaking on words he couldn't say. Kate felt something inside her chest crack open, felt all the healing she'd done in those beautiful weeks shatter like glass. This was what she'd been afraid of all along. This was why she didn't trust, didn't let herself hope, didn't believe she could belong anywhere. Because powerful men always turned on you, because love across impossible divides always ended in betrayal, because a black woman reaching for happiness always got her hand slapped away. Minjun, get her out of here, Jin said, his voice dead now, all the rage burned out into cold ash. I don't care where she goes. Just get her out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. Minjun took Kate's arm, not roughly but firmly, and pulled her toward the exit. She didn't resist. What was the point? The evidence was there. The accusation was made. And Jin believed it. Believed she was capable of hurting Minseo. Believed every terrible thing his prejudice had been whispering in his ear since the day she arrived. It was raining when they stepped outside, a cold Los Angeles rain that felt like grief made weather. Minjun pulled Kate's bag from the SUV. Mrs. Kim had packed her things. Someone had already erased her from the mansion and set it on the wet pavement. Kate stared at it, at the puddle forming around it, at the physical representation of her life reduced to one soaked bag on a hospital sidewalk. I'm sorry, Minjun said quietly in Korean, then English. I'm sorry, Kate. He drove away, and Kate stood alone in the rain with nowhere to go and no one to call, her phone dead, her hope deader. Behind her, in the hospital, she heard Ji-hoon start screaming. That same desperate, gut-wrenching cry she'd first heard weeks ago. And Minseo's heart monitor began beeping frantically, her tiny body registering what her unconscious mind knew. Their mother was leaving. Kate was abandoning them, just like everyone else. But Kate couldn't hear any of that over the sound of her own heart breaking, couldn't feel anything except the cold rain and the weight of betrayal and the terrible, crushing certainty that she'd been right all along. She didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve love, didn't deserve anything except this, standing alone in the rain while the world reminded her exactly where she belonged. Nowhere. If that just softened something in you, good. That means you're human. And if you're human, don't sit here feeling everything and then walk away like you were never here. Subscribe, join the people who actually finished the story, and comment one word for what you felt when the crying stopped. Kate walked for 3 hours through the rain, her bag getting heavier with every block, her feet blistering in shoes never meant for this kind of pilgrimage. She walked from the gleaming towers of downtown Los Angeles back toward Inglewood, toward the small apartment she'd been evicted from 2 months ago, but hoped might still somehow be there. Might somehow still offer shelter. The rain soaked through her clothes, plastered her hair to her skull, washed away her tears so thoroughly that she couldn't tell where grief ended and water began. The neighborhood looked worse than she remembered. Or maybe she'd just gotten used to clean streets and manicured lawns, to a world where broken glass got swept up immediately and graffiti never stayed longer than a day. Here, the potholes were lakes, the streetlights were broken, and the few people she passed looked at her with the kind of studied indifference that meant trouble nearby. Her building stood like a rotting tooth in a row of decay, the security door long since broken, the hallway smelling of urine and disappointment. Kate climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, her legs shaking from exhaustion and shock, and found her apartment door hanging open, kicked in, the cheap lock shattered. Her stomach dropped. She pushed the door wider and stepped into her personal apocalypse. The apartment had been ransacked, furniture overturned, cushions slashed, her few belongings scattered across the floor like someone had wanted to destroy not just her space, but the very idea that she'd ever lived here. On the wall above her futon, someone had spray-painted in angry red letters, "You belong to me." Kate knew that handwriting, had seen variations of it on birthday cards, on love notes that turned to threats, on the restraining order she'd never had the courage to fully enforce. Chandler had been here, was maybe still here, and every survival instinct she'd honed through years of abuse started screaming at her to run, to leave, to get out now. She turned toward the door, but she was too late. Chandler came at her from the bedroom, moving faster than a man his size should move, his hand catching her shoulder and slamming her into the wall so hard the drywall cracked. Kate's head bounced off the plaster, stars exploding across her vision, and before she could scream, his hand was around her throat, lifting her onto her toes, cutting off her air. "You thought you were special?" Chandler's voice was almost conversational, if you didn't count the rage vibrating through every syllable. "Thought some rich Asian dude would save you? Thought you could just leave me, run away, live in a mansion in the hills while I'm dealing with your debt?" He pulled her forward and slammed her back again, and something in Kate's spine sent lightning bolts of agony down her legs. She clawed at his hand, gasping, dying, but Chandler had done this before. Knew exactly how much pressure to use, how to hurt without quite killing. "You're nothing," he growled, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and sour. "Nothing but a—" The slur that came out of his mouth was the same one Jin had used, the same word meant to reduce her to less than human, to remind her that in both men's eyes, when they were angry enough, when she'd disappointed them enough, her blackness was a crime. Her existence was a problem. Her very being was something to be erased. Chandler dropped her and Kate collapsed, gasping, her throat on fire. She tried to crawl toward the door, but his boot caught her in the ribs with a crack that she felt more than heard. Once, twice, 3 times he kicked her, methodical and brutal, breaking bones with the same casual violence he'd once used on her pregnant belly. "Chandler, please," Kate tried to say, but another kick cut off her words, this one to her back, driving the air from her lungs in a whoosh of agony. He flipped her over, straddling her chest, his hands finding her throat again, squeezing, watching her face turn purple with the detached interest of someone observing an insect die. Kate's vision started going dark around the edges. Her body thrashed weakly, survival instinct overriding the part of her brain that wondered if death might actually be easier than this. She thought of Ji-hoon and Min-seo, of their faces, of never seeing them again, and that hurt worse than the beating, worse than the choking, worse than everything. The last thing she heard before consciousness fled was Chandler's voice. "Should have stayed where you belonged, bitch. Should have known better than to reach above your station." Then nothing. Mrs. Washington, the 73-year-old woman who lived next door and had called the police on Chandler more times than she could count, heard the sounds of violence through the thin walls and picked up her phone with shaking, arthritic hands. Not again. Please, not again. She'd watched that sweet girl leave in an ambulance 3 years ago, pregnant and beaten nearly to death, and had prayed she'd never come back to this place. But here she was. And here he was. And history was repeating itself with the inevitability of Greek tragedy. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man killing a woman in apartment 3B. Please hurry. Please. The paramedics found Kate unconscious in a pool of blood, Chandler long gone with her phone and the $20 she'd had in her wallet, the door still hanging open like a mouth screaming. They worked on her with urgent hands, calling out vitals that sounded like a death sentence. Collapsed lung, 3 broken ribs, severe concussion, internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping, pulse thready. She's got maybe 20 minutes if we don't get her to surgery, one paramedic said, already loading her onto the gurney. Let's move. At Good Samaritan Hospital, Kate went straight into emergency surgery while Mrs. Washington sat in the waiting room, crying and praying, the only person in the world who cared whether this broken black girl lived or died. The surgeons worked for 4 hours, repairing the collapsed lung, stopping the internal bleeding, stabilizing the brain bleed that should have killed her, but somehow hadn't. Kate woke up 4 days later in the ICU, tubes in her throat, machines beeping around her like mechanical grief, and wished she hadn't. The pain was extraordinary. Every breath was knives, every movement was torture. But worse than the physical agony was the emotional devastation. She stared at the ceiling tiles with empty eyes and replayed it all. Jin's face contorted with rage and disgust, the slurs falling from his mouth, the absolute certainty that she was nothing, had always been nothing, would never be anything more. She'd lost Minseo and Ji-hoon, lost the only home she'd known since her own baby died, lost the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she deserved happiness, lost everything again, the way she always did, because that's what happened to women like her. Black women who dreamed too big, who reached for things they had no right to touch, who forgot their place in a world designed to keep them nowhere. On the 5th day, Kate had an unexpected visitor. Diana Jensen walked into the ICU room, 53 years old and looking older, her face lined with regret and decades of her own survival. She'd been estranged from Kate for 2 years, ever since she'd suggested Kate try harder to make her marriage work, not understanding that trying harder with a man like Chandler just meant dying slower. "Baby," Diana whispered, sinking into the chair beside Kate's bed, reaching for her daughter's hand with tears streaming down her face. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you, should have loved you better. This is all my fault." Kate turned her head slowly, the movement sending waves of nausea through her body, and looked at her mother, really looked at her, for the first time in years. She saw the guilt there, the shame, the regret that came too late to change anything, but maybe not too late to matter. "You stayed silent," Kate whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "When Chandler was beating me, when I was pregnant. You knew, Mama. Everyone knew. But nobody said anything." Diana's face crumpled. "I was afraid. Afraid of what people would say. That we'd raised you wrong, that you'd chosen wrong, that it reflected on me, on us. I was afraid of being judged by the church, by the community, by everybody who'd whisper about how Diana Jensen's daughter couldn't even keep a man without getting beat." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I chose my reputation over your safety, and I have to live with that. But baby, you need to know, it wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault." "I lost 2 babies now, Mama," Kate whispered, and the words broke something open inside both of them. "My Maya. And now Minseo and Ji-hoon. They're not dead, but I lost them. And I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't lose another. I can't survive another." Diana held Kate's hand and cried with her. And for the first time in years, maybe in their whole complicated relationship, they were honest with each other. They talked about the ways the community had failed Kate, about the shame that kept Black women silent about their abuse, about the toxic masculinity that destroyed Black men and the women who loved them, about the way poverty and trauma passed down through generations like cursed heirlooms. "That man in the hills," Diana said carefully. The one you were working for. You loved him? Kate closed her eyes, fresh tears leaking out. I was starting to. And I loved those babies like they were mine. But when things went wrong, he turned on me so fast, Mama. Used words I never thought I'd hear from him. Reminded me that no matter what I did, no matter how good I was, I'd never be enough. Not for that world. Not for him. Then he's a fool, Diana said fiercely. And he doesn't deserve you. None of them do. But baby, you've got to survive this. You've got to fight. Because we don't get to quit. Black women don't get to quit. We survive. That's what we do. Kate stared at the ceiling and wondered if survival was enough anymore. Wondered if living was worth it when living hurt this much. When every time she put herself back together, someone came along to smash her into smaller pieces. She was so tired, so broken, so done. But somewhere in the Hollywood Hills, Ji-hoon and Min-seo were crying for her. And in the glass mansion, pieces of a truth were starting to come together. And Kate's story, her painful, complicated, unjust story, wasn't finished yet, even if she wished it was. Mrs. Kim couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m., she lay in her small bedroom on the mansion's 3rd floor, staring at the ceiling while her grandmother's voice whispered warnings in her mind. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong from the moment Dr. Clayton arrived that Friday morning, from the way the white woman's smile never reached her eyes, from the cold calculation Mrs. Kim had seen flickering across her face when she thought no one was watching. 30 years of serving the Song family had taught Mrs. Kim to trust her instincts above all else. She had survived this long in a dangerous world by paying attention to the things other people missed, the slight hesitations, the too perfect alibis, the moments when someone's mask slipped just enough to reveal the monster underneath. She got out of bed, pulled on her robe, and made her way down to Jin's office where the security system lived. The mansion had cameras everywhere. Jin's paranoia about threats to his family meant every angle was covered, every moment recorded. Mrs. Kim had the access codes because Jin trusted her completely, had trusted her since he was a boy, and she was the young housekeeper his mother had brought from Seoul. She sat at the desk and began scrolling through Friday's footage, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her heart beating faster with each passing minute. There, Dr. Clayton arriving at 9:30 a.m. Kate answering the door with Min-seo on her hip, smiling, trusting, completely unaware. The doctor entering, Kate taking Ji-hoon to the playroom. Mrs. Kim fast-forwarded and felt her blood turn to ice. Paula alone in the nursery with Min-seo for 18 minutes. 18 minutes with the door closed, with no one watching, with a baby who would be unconscious 3 hours later. Mrs. Kim's hands shook as she watched Paula emerge from the nursery, walk calmly past the playroom, and then, this was the part that made Mrs. Kim's breath catch, head upstairs to the staff quarters. The camera in the hallway showed Paula entering Kate's private bathroom. She was inside for less than 2 minutes, but when she emerged, her medical bag looked lighter. Her face wore an expression of grim satisfaction, and Mrs. Kim knew with absolute certainty what had happened. She grabbed her phone and called Min-jun, not caring that it was 3:47 a.m., not caring about anything except the terrible mistake they had all made. Min-jun answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Men in his profession learned to sleep lightly. Min-jun-si, come to the mansion. Now, I found something. He arrived 20 minutes later, his hair still wet from a hurried shower, and Mrs. Kim showed him the footage. She watched his face change as he understood, watched the horror dawn, watched the guilt settle into the lines around his mouth, watched him realize they had destroyed an innocent woman's life because they'd been too quick to judge, too ready to believe the worst about someone who didn't look like them. Shabal? Min-jun whispered, the Korean curse falling from his lips like a prayer. Oh, Kate, what have we done? But Mrs. Kim wasn't finished. She pulled out her notebook, the one where she documented everything, and showed him her observations from the past 6 weeks. Paula's visits had increased in frequency. Paula's eyes had grown colder each time she watched Jin interact with Kate. Paula had asked pointed questions about Kate's schedule, her room location, her habits. And most damning, Mrs. Kim had overheard Paula on the phone in the garden 2 weeks ago, her voice tight with rage, saying words that now made terrible sense. She doesn't belong there. With him. With those babies. Min-jun's jaw clenched. I need to check something. Stay here. He left the mansion and drove through the pre-dawn darkness to a 24-hour pharmacy in Koreatown, where he knew the night manager, a man who owed the Song family more favors than he could count. 20 minutes of searching through computer records revealed what Min-jun had suspected. Dr. Paula Clayton had purchased infant sedative 3 days before Min-seo was poisoned. The exact same sedative found in the baby's bloodstream. But Min-jun wasn't done. He drove to Paula's apartment in Santa Monica as the sun began to rise, his lockpicking skills, learned in his youth on the streets of Seoul before Jin's father had recruited him, making quick work of her door. He moved through her pristine space like a ghost, searching for the proof he knew had to exist. People like Paula, people who believed they were untouchable, always kept records, always kept evidence of their cleverness. He found it in her home office, hidden in a locked drawer beneath tax documents and medical journals. A laptop Paula clearly thought was secure. Min-jun was no computer expert, but he knew people who were, and one phone call brought a tech specialist to the apartment within 30 minutes. By 7 a.m., they had everything. The messages between Paula and Chandler Williams painted a picture of conspiracy so calculated, so venomous, it made Min-jun's hands shake with rage. Payment schedules, detailed plans for framing Kate, racist justifications that made Min-jun sick to read. Paula's belief that Kate was beneath Jin, that a black woman had no business in their world, that removing her was practically a public service. But the most shocking discovery was buried deeper in Paula's files, medical records that proved she had deliberately caused Ji-yeon's death during childbirth, an accidental medication error that was anything but accidental. Notes in Paula's own hand detailing how she'd administered the wrong dose of medication during delivery, how she'd waited just long enough before calling for help, how she'd watched Jin's wife die, knowing she was creating an opportunity for herself. Paula Clayton was a murderer, had been a murderer for 6 months. And they had all trusted her. Had let her near the babies. Had let her destroy Kate while they stood by and watched. Min-jun drove back to the mansion with the laptop and printed evidence, his mind replaying every moment of that terrible night at the hospital. Jin's face contorted with rage. The slurs falling from his mouth, Kate's devastation as she was thrown out into the rain. Min-jun had done that, had physically removed her, had been complicit in her destruction. He found Mrs. Kim in the kitchen making tea she wouldn't drink, her face aged a decade overnight. Jin was upstairs in the nursery where he'd spent every night since Kate left, holding whichever twin was crying. Which was both of them. Always both of them, their little bodies racked with grief for the mother who'd abandoned them. "Boss," Min-jun said from the doorway, his voice rough. "You need to come downstairs. Now." Jin looked at him with dead eyes. Min-seo had been released from the hospital 2 days ago, medically stable but emotionally destroyed. Neither twin would eat properly. Neither would sleep for more than an hour. They cried and cried and cried. And Jin had aged a lifetime watching them suffer for a second time. Watching them grieve for Kate the way they'd once grieved for their birth mother. "Whatever it is can wait," Jin said in Korean, his voice hollow. "No, boss, it can't." Min-jun's tone made Jin look up. "We made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake. Kate didn't poison Min-seo. It was Paula. And it's so much worse than you can imagine." 10 minutes later, Jin sat at his desk with the evidence spread before him like accusations. Mrs. Kim and Min-jun stood silent, watching their master read through the proof of his catastrophic error. His face went white, then red, then white again. His hands shook so badly he could barely turn the pages, the messages between Paula and Chandler, the payment schedule. The racist justifications that made Jin's stomach turn because he'd heard echoes of those same thoughts from his own associates, from his own mother, and God help him, from his own mouth when fear and grief had made him vicious. But the medical records of Ji-yeon's death, those made Jin stop breathing. Paula had killed his wife, had murdered her deliberately, coldly, for jealousy and obsession, had stolen Ji-yeon from him, stolen a mother from his children, and then tried to steal Minseo too when Kate had threatened to take Jin's attention away from where Paula thought it belonged. And Kate. Beautiful, broken, innocent Kate who had loved his children, who had healed his family, who had trusted him enough to stay despite every reason to run, he had destroyed her. Had called her things that made him want to vomit now. Had thrown her out into the rain where Chandler had found her and nearly beaten her to death. The Korean associates who had questioned Kate's presence, who had whispered their concerns about optics and tradition and appropriateness, stood in the doorway now, watching their boss read the truth. They saw their own prejudice reflected in those printed messages, saw how their casual racism had created an environment where Paula felt justified in her actions, where destroying a black woman seemed acceptable because she didn't belong in their world. Jin's anguished scream tore through the mansion like a wounded animal, echoing off the glass and marble that had witnessed everything, that held the memory of Kate's laughter and the twins' first peaceful sleep, and every moment of grace that had been shattered by lies. "What have I done?" Jin roared, sweeping everything off his desk in one violent motion. "What have I done? Ji-yeon! Oh God, Ji-yeon!" He collapsed forward, his head in his hands, his body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief, somewhere that held guilt and shame and horror at his own capacity for cruelty. Mrs. Kim wept silently, her hands clutched to her chest. Min-jun stood rigid, his own guilt carved into every line of his face. The associates looked away, unable to meet each other's eyes. Jin stood suddenly, violence in every movement. "Min-jun, bring Paula to me, now. I don't care what you have to do. Bring her to me now." Min-jun nodded once and left, pulling out his phone, mobilizing the men who could find anyone, anywhere, who could make anyone appear when the Song family wanted them found. Paula Clayton's time had run out. The web of lies had unraveled, and justice, brutal, complete, unforgiving justice, was coming for her whether she was ready or not. They brought Paula to the mansion at noon, two of Min-jun's men half-dragging, half-carrying her through the front door she'd walked through so confidently for 6 years. She was still in her yoga pants and oversized sweater, her blonde hair in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup. They'd pulled her from her apartment before she could even protest, before she could lawyer up or run or do anything except come face to face with the consequences of her actions. She saw the evidence scattered across Jin's desk the moment they pushed her into his office. Her laptop, the printed messages, the medical records. Her face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, fear, calculation, before settling on something that looked almost like relief. The mask she'd worn for 6 years finally cracked, then shattered, and what emerged was so ugly that Min-jun took an involuntary step back. Paula started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, not nervous laughter, but the manic, liberated sound of someone who'd been holding in a scream for so long that finally releasing it felt like ecstasy. "You figured it out," she said, looking at Jin with wild eyes. "Finally. I was wondering how long it would take. Though honestly, I thought I'd have more time before someone thought to actually investigate the White Doctor." Her voice dripped with venom. "Because that's the thing, isn't it? You trusted me automatically. Doubted her automatically. Want to guess why?" "Shut your mouth," Jin said, his voice so cold it could freeze blood. He held a gun loosely in his right hand, pointed at the floor, but ready. So ready. "I loved you for 6 years," Paula shouted, all the bitterness pouring out now. 6 years, Jin. I was there before Ji-yeon. I was there during your marriage to her, that Korean woman who wasn't even that pretty, who wasn't even that special. I delivered your babies. I held your hand when she died. I positioned myself perfectly, waiting for you to finally see me, to see that I was exactly what you needed. You killed my wife. Jin's hand tightened on the gun. You murdered Ji-yeon. One little medication error during delivery. Paula's smile was grotesque. So easy when you know exactly what you're doing. Too much of this, not enough of that. Wait just a few minutes too long to call for help. She made a dismissive gesture. She was dying before anyone realized something was wrong, and you were so grateful to me for trying to save her. So tender, so vulnerable. I thought, finally he'll see me. Jin lunged forward, pressing the gun to Paula's temple, his finger on the trigger, his whole body shaking with the need to make her stop talking, stop existing, stop having ever been born. I should kill you right now, should make you pay for what you did. But you won't, Paula said, her eyes locked on his. Because you're Jin Gaeon Song? You have rules, you have honor. You're not like boss. Minjun's hand closed over Jin's wrist, gentle but firm. She needs to face justice, real justice, not this. Let the law have her. Let her rot in a cage for the rest of her miserable life, where everyone will know what she is. Jin's hand shook. The gun barrel pressed against Paula's skin hard enough to leave a mark, and for a long moment, no one in the room breathed. Then Jin lowered the weapon and stepped back, his face a mask of disgust. Then you fell for that maid, Paula continued, unable to stop herself, unable to resist the urge to burn everything down now that the truth was out. That ghetto black woman who had no business in your world, in your home, with your children. And you looked at her the way you were supposed to look at me. You smiled at her. You softened for her. So I fixed it. You tried to kill my daughter. I gave her a sedative, Paula screamed. She was fine. I'm a doctor. I knew exactly what I was doing. I just needed Kate gone. Needed you to see her for what she really was. Some traumatized, damaged woman who didn't belong anywhere near you or your family. I should be by your side, Jin. Not some... The slur that came out of Paula's mouth was the same one Jin had used, the same poison that had infected everyone, and hearing it from her lips made Jin realize with crushing clarity exactly how his own words had sounded to Kate. How they had cut. How they had destroyed. Minjun called the police while Paula sat in the chair, her confession recorded, her fate sealed. They came with their lights and their handcuffs and their Miranda rights, and they took her away still laughing that terrible, broken laugh. The charges were multiple: murder in Ji-yeon's death, attempted murder of Min Seo, conspiracy, assault by proxy for Chandler's attack on Kate. The evidence was overwhelming. Her own laptop had condemned her. Paula Clayton was sentenced to 30 years without possibility of parole. She would die in a cage, exactly as Minjun had promised. As for Chandler Williams, he never made it to trial. He was found dead in county jail 2 days after his arrest for Kate's assault, a shanking that the guards somehow didn't witness despite cameras covering every angle. The message was clear to anyone who understood how Jin's world worked. You don't touch what belongs to the Song family and live to tell about it. But that was later. First, Jin had to face what he'd done. He drove to Good Samaritan Hospital in his Maserati, still wearing the same clothes from that morning, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Mrs. Kim had called ahead. Kate was out of ICU now, moved to a regular room, stable but still critical. Her mother Diana was with her. She was conscious. She might be willing to see visitors. Jin stood outside Kate's room for 10 minutes, staring through the window at what his words had caused. Kate lay in the hospital bed, her beautiful face swollen and bruised, her head partially shaved from brain surgery, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped steadily. She looked so small in that bed, so broken, so far from the woman who danced around his nursery singing gospel hymns to his children. Diana Jensen noticed him standing there and came out into the hallway, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", but she stood in front of Jin like she was 10 feet tall and made of steel. "You did this," Diana said, her voice quiet and deadly. "Your words put her in the hands of the man who almost killed her. You threw her out. You called her—" Diana's voice broke. "You made her believe she was nothing, and she went looking for nothing because that's what you told her she was." "I know." Jin's voice cracked. "God help me, I know." "Do you?" Diana stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Do you know what it's like to be a black woman in a world that tells you you're not enough? Do you know what it took for her to trust you? To believe that maybe, just maybe, she could belong somewhere? And you destroyed that in one moment. One terrible moment where your fear and your prejudice were more important than the truth." "Mrs. Jensen, please. I need to see her. You need to wait." Diana's voice was iron. "She's not ready. She may never be ready. And you will respect that. You will wait until she decides if she can even look at you without seeing the man who broke her all over again." Jin waited 3 days. 3 days of pacing his mansion while his twins cried for their mother, while Mrs. Kim sent updates about Kate's condition, while Min-Jun handled Paula's arrest and Chandler's permanent silence. 3 days of replaying every word he'd said in that hospital hallway, every slur, every accusation, every moment of his own ugliness reflected back at him with crystal clarity. On the 4th day, Diana called. Kate would see him, but only for a few minutes, and only because Diana had convinced her that Jin had something to say that she needed to hear. Jin entered Kate's hospital room like he was walking to his own execution. Kate lay in the bed, turned toward the window, not looking at him. Her mother stood in the corner like a sentinel, watching, protecting, ready to throw him out at the first sign of additional harm. Jin crossed the room and did something he had never done in his adult life, something his father would have called shameful, something his Korean pride screamed against. He dropped to his knees beside Kate's hospital bed. "Mianheo," he said in Korean first, the language of his deepest vulnerability, the words his mother had taught him before he could walk. "정말 미안해요. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Kate's eyes closed, fresh tears leaking out. "Kate," Jin continued in English, his voice breaking on her name. "I failed you. I let my fear and my prejudice blind me. I called you. I said things—" He couldn't even repeat them. Couldn't force those poison words past his lips again. "I can never take back what I did. I can never erase those words. But I need you to know. Paula framed you. She poisoned Min-Seo. She killed Ji-yeon. She conspired with Chandler to destroy you. And I believed her instead of you. I chose fear over trust. I chose prejudice over love." Kate's first words in days came out hoarse and broken. "Are the babies okay?" Jin's face crumpled, his composure shattering completely. Of course her first words weren't about herself, weren't about her suffering, weren't even about his betrayal. They were about Ji-hoon and Min-Seo, about the babies she loved more than her own life. "They won't eat, won't sleep. They cry for you, Kate. They're crying for their mother." "I'm not their mother," Kate whispered, her voice dead. "I'm nothing. You told me that. Remember? I was wrong." Jin was weeping now, tears streaming down his face without shame or restraint. "I was so wrong. You're everything they need. Everything I—" He stopped himself. This wasn't about him. This was about Kate. About her healing. About his guilt. "I've paid all your medical bills. I've put money in your account. Enough that you'll never have to worry again. Chandler is dead. Paula is in prison. And I will protect you for the rest of your life, whether you forgive me or not." He pulled out an envelope and set it on her bedside table. Inside was $250,000 and his personal card, the one with his direct number that only a handful of people in the world possessed. "I don't know if I can trust you," Kate said, still not looking at him. Trust any of this again. You made me believe I was safe, that I belonged. And then you? Her voice broke. You showed me exactly what you thought of me, what I really was to you. I'll wait, Jin said, rising from his knees but staying close, needing her to hear this. I'll spend my life earning your trust back, proving that I've changed, proving that I see you, really see you. And I'm so sorry it took losing you to make me understand what I had. He left the room without another word, left her with her mother and her pain and the impossible choice of whether to forgive the unforgivable. 6 weeks passed like a slow season changing, like winter giving way to spring but taking its time about it, not rushing the transformation because some things couldn't be rushed without destroying them completely. Jin bought Kate a house in View Park, one of the historic black neighborhoods in Los Angeles, where doctors and lawyers and people who'd made something of themselves lived in beautiful homes with tree-lined streets. It was a 1920s bungalow with a wraparound porch and a garden that needed tending, far enough from the mansion to be her own space, but close enough that, if she ever wanted, the drive wouldn't be long. He put it in her name, furnished it with care, asking Diana what Kate might like instead of imposing his own taste. Made sure it was a sanctuary, not a cage. Diana moved in to care for Kate during recovery, and for the first time in years, maybe in their whole complicated relationship, they got it right. Diana cooked her mother's recipes and told stories about Kate's grandmother, about the strength that ran in their family like a river, about the way Black women had survived everything the world threw at them and still found ways to bloom. Kate healed slowly, physical therapy for her injuries, therapy for her trauma, medication for the nightmares that came every time she closed her eyes. Mrs. Kim sent daily photos and videos of the twins. They showed Ji-hoon and Min Seo refusing bottles, turning their faces away from food, crying themselves to sleep every night. The videos were heartbreaking, these babies who'd finally learned to laugh now back in their private hell, grieving for the woman who'd saved them once and couldn't save them now. Jin sent recorded Korean lullabies, the ones Kate had taught him, his voice uncertain and off-key but trying. He sent letters every single day, written in English and Korean, words on paper that Kate couldn't bring herself to read for the first 3 weeks. Diana saved them in a box, telling her daughter they'd be there when she was ready, that healing couldn't be rushed, that forgiveness was a choice only Kate could make. In week 4, Kate finally opened one of Jin's letters. It was simple, devastating in its honesty. I miss hearing you sing. The twins miss you. The house misses you. I miss the man I was becoming when you were here. I'm sorry. I'll always be sorry. That same week, Mrs. Kim sent a video of Ji-hoon crying while looking at a photo of Kate, his little fist pressed to the screen, his mouth forming sounds that were almost mama. Kate watched it 17 times, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously, and whispered to the empty room, "My heart never left that house." But she wasn't ready. Not yet. 2 months after the betrayal, Kate drove to the mansion in the car Jin had bought her. A safe, practical SUV that made Diana shake her head and mutter about men who thought money fixed everything. Kate hadn't told anyone she was coming. She just woke up one morning and knew she needed to see them, needed to hold Ji-hoon and Min Seo, needed to know if the love she felt was still real, or if trauma had poisoned even that. Jin answered the door himself, his face transforming when he saw her. Hope and fear and desperate joy all colliding. But he didn't move toward her, didn't presume anything, just stepped back and said quietly, "They're in the nursery. They'll be so happy to see you." Kate climbed the stairs slowly, her body still healing, her heart racing. She heard them before she saw them, that familiar crying that had once haunted the mansion, back again, filling the pristine space with sound that money couldn't silence. She pushed open the nursery door and saw Ji-hoon and Min Seo in their cribs, both wailing, both inconsolable. The moment they saw her, the crying stopped. Just like that first day, That first miracle. They looked at her with wide eyes, like they couldn't believe she was real. And then both babies screamed with joy and reached for her with desperate hands. Kate crossed the room and lifted them, one in each arm, muscle memory taking over, and they buried their faces in her neck, their little bodies shaking with relief, their hands fisted in her shirt like they'd never let go again. Ji-hoon made sounds that were almost words. Min-seo just cried and cried, but differently now. Happily. "Mama," Ji-hoon said clearly, his first real word, and Kate felt something inside her chest unlock. She wasn't their mother by birth. Wasn't their mother by law or blood or any claim she had a right to make. But she was their mother by choice, by love, by the fact that she'd rather die than leave them alone in their suffering ever again. Jin stood in the doorway watching, his hand pressed to his mouth, tears streaming down his face. He didn't interrupt, didn't insert himself, just watched the reunion he'd feared he'd destroyed forever, and thanked God for mercy he didn't deserve. Kate stayed for lunch, then stayed to watch the twins nap, then stayed for dinner. One day became 3 days, became a week, became the slow realization that she couldn't leave. This was her family. These were her babies. And somehow, impossibly, terrifyingly, she had to find a way to trust again. Jin learned to respect boundaries he'd never had to respect before. Learned to ask instead of assume. Learned that healing couldn't be rushed, that trust rebuilt slowly or not at all. He kept his distance but stayed close, in the next room, down the hall, always available, but never pushing. Kate taught the twins Black lullabies, and they responded to both cultures. Gospel songs and Korean songs, soul food and kimchi, the beautiful hybrid of who they were becoming. She watched Jin with new eyes, seeing him learn, seeing him change, seeing him choose humility over pride every single day. 4 months after her return, on a night when both twins were teething and miserable, Kate and Jin stayed awake together caring for them. They walked the nursery floor, rocking fussy babies, sharing the burden the way partners did. And as the sun began to rise, as Ji-hoon finally fell asleep in Jin's arms and Min-seo dozed against Kate's shoulder, they stood together on the mansion's balcony overlooking Los Angeles. "Kate," Jin said quietly, his voice rough from exhaustion and emotion. "I didn't think I could love again after Ji-yeon, and I definitely didn't think—" He paused, searching for words in 2 languages and finding them insufficient in both. "I didn't think I'd be lucky enough to earn the love of someone like you. I know what I said. I know I hurt you with my fear and prejudice, but I can't stop thinking about you. Can't imagine life without you." Kate looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man he was becoming, not the man he'd been in his worst moment. "I'm scared, Jin. Scared to trust you. Scared of what people will say. Scared I'm not enough for you, for this world you live in." Jin turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "You're everything. And I'll spend every day proving that I've changed, that I see you, that I love you exactly as you are." He kissed her then, gentle, tentative, asking permission even in the act itself. Kate cried, Jin cried, and between them the babies slept peacefully, finally, completely. Ji-hoon looked up at them kissing and clapped his tiny hands together, giggling. Min-seo's first clear word came right then, "Mama." Not mama in general, but calling Kate specifically, claiming her, naming her as the mother she'd become. But their happiness was interrupted 1 month later when a rival Korean gang decided Jin's weakness was finally exploitable. They discovered his feelings for Kate, and they kidnapped Diana from her home in View Park, leaving a message demanding $10 million and Jin's territory in Koreatown. The warehouse confrontation was brutal. Guns blazing, Jin's men against the rival gang. Violence of the kind Kate had hoped never to see. Jin took a bullet to the shoulder protecting her, his body shielding hers without hesitation. Min-jun eliminated the gang leader with cold precision, and when the smoke cleared, Diana was safe, Kate was safe, and Jin was bleeding but alive. In the ambulance, Diana held her daughter's hand and said quietly, "He really loves you, baby. I see it now. He'd die for you." Kate looked at Jin being patched up by paramedics, his eyes never leaving her face despite his pain, and realized she couldn't live without him either. 8 months after Kate's return, they celebrated the twins' first birthday in the mansion's garden with a fusion celebration that honored every culture in their beautifully complicated family. Korean traditional clothes and Southern barbecue, K-pop and gospel music, relatives from Seoul and friends from Inglewood. A family quilt being stitched together from different fabrics that somehow created something more beautiful than any single piece alone. Jin proposed with both an American diamond ring and a traditional Korean ceremony, dropping to his knees in front of everyone, his mother, his associates, Diana, Mrs. Kim, Min-jun, and the twins, and asking in both languages, "Joa gyolon 해주세요. Kate, please marry me. You taught me that love has no color, no border, no limit. You taught me strength is choosing love after fear tried to destroy you. Will you build this family with me? Forever?" Kate said yes in English and Korean, her voice strong despite her tears. The wedding 3 months later was everything, Kate in both a white dress and a traditional hanbok, a gospel choir singing Korean hymns, Ji-hoon as ring bearer, and Min-seo as flower girl. Both toddlers calling out, "Mama!" and "Ap-pa!" during the ceremony to delighted laughter. Jin's mother attended and publicly bowed in apology to both Kate and Diana, acknowledging her own prejudice, asking forgiveness across language and culture barriers. 1 year after the wedding, Jin officially left the criminal empire, transferring everything to Min-jun. Kate was pregnant with their biological daughter, and in the mansion's living room there was a family photo that showed the beautiful chaos they'd created. Jin, Korean. Kate, Black. Ji-hoon and Min-seo, Korean-Mexican. And soon, a baby who would be Korean Black. 5 different shades? One love. In a prison cell, Paula watched the wedding photos on the news and understood with crushing finality that she'd lost everything to her own hate. She'd tried to destroy love and had only destroyed herself. You stayed through the pain, the betrayal, the comeback. So don't do the last disrespectful thing and leave without subscribing. If this story mattered enough for you to finish it, it matters enough to support it. Hit subscribe. Don't be the person who takes the feeling and gives nothing back. The final scene Kate would remember forever came on an ordinary Tuesday when she sat with all 3 children, Ji-hoon and Min-seo now 2 years old, baby Naomi 6 months old, teaching them about their cultures. Korean language and Black history, Mexican heritage and gospel music, K-pop and soul food, building bridges instead of walls, celebrating difference instead of fearing it. Love doesn't see color, Kate thought, looking at her impossibly beautiful family, but it celebrates every shade. Family isn't about blood or race. It's about who chooses to love you when you're broken and stays to help you heal. Forgiveness heals not just the forgiven, but the forgiver. And a Black woman's love is worthy of a king. Never let anyone tell you different. They were broken people from different worlds who chose each other anyway. They were proof that redemption was possible, that love could cross any divide, that family was created, not inherited. They were everything the world said was impossible, and they were home.